In the program Current Affairs Now, we bring you a discussion on Land Acquisition Bill. The participants are Saurabh Sanyal, Executive Director, PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Rohit Bansal, CEO, India Strategic Group, and Shekhar Iyer, Associate Editor, Hindustan Times, and Manikant Thakur, AIR Correspondent, who initiates and moderates the discussion.
Mr. Rohit Bansal, Mr. Shekhar Iyer, and Mr. Saurabh Sanyal, welcome to the program. Whenever we talk of land, the first thing that comes to our mind is who is the landowner, for what purpose he is using the land, and what government is going to get a new legislation for. Since India had land records way back in the days of Sher Shah Suri, where he created some kind of land record in the form of revenue sectors for the first time, it was under British rule that they came out with Land Acquisition Bill in 1894. More than a century passed, but no reform took place. Now, the present government has thought of bringing out a legislation. In fact, it was brought way back on 7th of September 2011 in the form of Land Acquisition Bill with lots of transparency and all. It was presented in the Parliament, in Lok Sabha, this session also. The discussion is yet to take place. Mr. Shekhar Iyer, since you have been covering the subject for a long time, what do you think was the immediate provocation for bringing this bill?
Well, more than immediate provocation, I would say that the last few years has seen very violent agitation in different parts of our country by farmers, by people opposed to projects, by tribals who feel threatened by displacement of some mining mega projects. So I think it was building up rather for some time, and the whole issue was about how the land is acquired, for what purpose it is acquired, and what happens to the people who are disposed. What about rehabilitation? What about resettlement? So essentially, this bill is to replace a very old law, because so far there has been only one statute, and that was enacted in 1894. So the new bill takes a complete new look as to the purpose of land acquisition, because the fundamental premise of this acquisition bill is it should be for public purpose, and goes ahead to even define what is a public purpose and what should be the method of compensation, what should be the process of compensation settlement. Then it goes on to actually delineate exact relief and rehabilitation measures. This is something that was never thought of, never conceived, and this is seen as a very big measure, so as to have some kind of a certainty both for the people acquiring the land and people who are selling the land, and also other stakeholders, because what has happened is, whether it is an housing project or whether it is a highways construction project, we have seen, the project is acquired, tenders are floated, companies are given contract to run the project, then suddenly there is a huge public agitation and whole thing comes to a standstill where everybody is affected. I think this is to rather clear the air and put for once for all have a mechanism which takes care of every stakeholder.
Mr. Rohit Bansal, we have been very active in the field. Who are these stakeholders?
Well, to supplement what Shekhar eminently put, in 1894, the state was the only agency who was acquiring land for public purposes, whether making canals or roads or any other thing. And the state knew best as per the thinking at that time. Then we became independent, but we continued to have the same process by which the state remained the arbitrator of all the public-oriented acquisition which needed to have taken place, the concept loosely called eminent domain principle. But with the inflow of the concept of public-private partnership, where the state would sometimes give a contract, thereafter the concept of eminent domain started becoming questionable, because the farmers or the people who you asked me to specify, the obvious stakeholders would be the landowner and those who are working in that land who are not necessarily the owners of the land, the workers. They would question the state all right, but when a private builder comes into play, they would question him a lot more. And they would ask the state why the terms of reference are so prejudicial to the landowner or the person who is working there. So I think this whole thing which Shekhar put is essentially about the push and the modernization that has happened in the transaction of land between hitherto the stakeholder at this moment and the private people coming in as an inevitable part of the India growth story.
Mr. Saurabh Sanyal, you are representing with this body. How do you look at the thing?
Mr. Manikant Thakur, I would like to reiterate the point that you have just highlighted. I have gone through the proposed new Land Acquisition Act, and it is found that it is not industry friendly. And it has got serious implementation problems as more and more rights have been proposed to the Gram Sabhas. This is going to severely get dominated by the local socio-economic political structures. Now, the basic objective of the new Land Acquisition Act, as we all know, is majorly social, as rightly brought out by Mr. Shekhar, that it is the best utilization of each and every parcel of land. It is protecting the poor, the landless. It is from losing their lands. Restoration of the alienated lands, which is already existing. Effective safeguards for lands of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and the tribals, which was already brought out. Ensuring the homestead rights, tenancy rights, land rights for women, and effective usage of the common property resources. However, the right to fair compensation, transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation, resettlement, as the name has been given to this, is also a very appropriate name. But it is not industry friendly. Firstly, because if there are two parties involved, if there is a private builder and another party who is the rightful owner of the land, now where is the question of resettlement and rehabilitation? I mean, it is a one-to-one direct business transaction between two parties. They form an agreement. There is a seller, there is a buyer. So there is no question of resettlement and rehabilitation in that case. Similarly, in the cases where there is a public-private partnership, I would like to add here that more than 100 projects are withheld on the hold today in PPP mode, which are due to land acquisition problem, which are on the hold. And nothing is moving. In fact, to a large extent, these projects are contributing to the rupee devaluation which has happened today. I mean, most of them are stuck up. Most of the lenders, they are all lenders basically. They are all medium to good entrepreneurs who have participated in these projects. And all these projects have landed up because of the land acquisition problems. Mostly the road projects, and there is no way, there is no outlet for these projects.
All right, Mr. Sanyal, what you have been saying is that only the industry should go to the seller, that is the farmer or anybody who wants to sell his property, and there should be anybody in between, and the government should not come here in picture in any way, and so there should be no question of resettlement and rehabilitation. Rohit, how far you agree to this theory or concept?
I think the industry has spectacularly failed, which is why there is so much of agitation by farmers. If the industry had such an efficient and professional and honest transaction with the landowners would not be on the streets with the bloodbath spilling over to the Yamuna next to the capital of India. So the industry has been completely insensitive to the longer term interests of the landowner, which is manifesting itself in these agitations. And I dare say the bill is a structured response of society, because it allows certain ground rules to be applicable universally to the industry as well as the owner and the guy who is not owning it and yet has stakes in it. So the person who is working on the land. These are ground rules. These are the minimum threshold limits, where you don't just dispossess a person because at that moment, in a moment of weakness or in a moment of illiteracy, the person gives you the land. I think an organized India cannot come out of bilateral relations of a dubious kind which have precisely caused the problem. So I say there is a sense of purpose in the proposed legislation to modernize the Act of 1894. It is fallacious to say it was never amended. There were severe and serious amendments in it right through, but they were not able to give a holistic picture to the various stakeholders, which includes government. And to say what has government got to do with it? Well, if you acquire a little bit of land for public purpose and the rest of the guys hold out against you, then also you'll go back to the government and cite the absence of reforms in the land market by the government.
Shekhar, in most of the states where land has been purchased directly from the farmers, so what do you say?
See, I think the point that Mr. Bansal was emphasizing is, you won't have this problem if the issues of compensation, if the issue of profiteering at the cost of the poor farmers had been, sorted out earlier. What is the basic problem today is you have projects which first one sees that first the land is acquired. After that, there is no sign of project immediately coming up. Something has been paid to the farmer. Now, over a period of time, when there is no project doesn't come up, and the poor farmer, when he finds after some time the value of land has shot up, and the person to whom he had sold land has further sold it to someone else and has made a huge profit. Now, here the whole question is that the original landowner should also get something. Now, I can understand the criticism. You see, the criticism essentially is that this is heavily loaded in favor of the landowner and ignores the needs of the people who would need affordable housing and about people who are looking for affordable hospitals, who are looking for schools, and who are looking for employment opportunities and for infrastructure to come up. Now, this is the basic argument, because if the prices, that the new mechanism will push the prices of land, and the whole elaborate way the land is to be acquired, first you have a social impact assessment, then you try to get the consent of the people, because it talks of, in particularly if it is in the scheduled areas, it talks of Gram Sabhas, they will have to give consent, and even otherwise 80% of people in that area would have to say yes to the land acquisition. So this itself is an elaborate process. But the counter argument is, unless you have this kind of mechanism of approval, then there will be less problems of the kind which Mr. Sanyal mentioned, where, the project has taken off, then the agitation starts, then the whole thing is stopped. The people who are doing the project, they have taken huge loans, so they cannot meet those financial, and overall it creates a situation. So the idea is, it is going to be elaborate mechanism of land acquisition, but at least it will be put things in proper perspective and bring some certainty. See, the problem today is we have very archaic laws and uncertain situations. So that is sought to be rather removed by this new way of deciding things. And also the other criticism is how much you are giving emphasis to, because the market rates. The whole idea is, if it is an urban area, it will be twice the whatever is the prevailing market rate, and if it is a rural area, it will be 4 times the market rate. And the industrial proponents are saying, well, why can't we go in for something called actual auctioning of land? So that is the better way to ensure the best price for the landowner than for... Now, this is a debate. I think this debate we'll witness it more in Parliament also, and more suggestions will come.
You see, the debate will happen in Parliament, and I think, Shekhar, we should not forget that what the UPA chairperson has said, that the certain amendment will also be brought into the bill, and I think the first amendment that will happen to the bill is to change its name. The right to fair compensation and transparency in land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement. Now, what Mr. Sanyal said, I would like to understand more from him. He said it shouldn't have been given to Gram Sabha. Now, the government at one point of time is trying to bring out transparency, fair compensation, and everything is happening at the level of Gram Sabha. Be it the pilot projects that Manrega, that government is bringing, or with DBT, Aadhaar, why not land acquisition?
See, the problem is that the more number of layers you keep adding into this, we have always been talking about a single window system, where it becomes for an industrialist or for an entrepreneur, he goes to a place, he gets the approvals at one place. It is to fast track the project. Most of the projects, after the introduction of this land bill, will further get complicated because of the long process as already been brought out by Mr. Iyer. Now, there should be some provision in the bill that there has to be a single window clearance, and some timelines are laid down. The industry body is not objecting to going to the Gram Sabha, but the time it will take, which we envisage today, it is going to run in years. It will not be a short period timeline.
And then there will be cost overruns.
And there will be cost overruns. That is the whole idea. For development of any country, an inescapable requirement is land. Earlier what was happening? Why the Land Act was not amended for 117 years? Why it has taken so much time? Because things are moving. India was on the growth path. From 1991 we had thought up our growth had reached double-digit figures in 2000 and 2010. But why? Later on this complication started because of the land mafia, where Mr. Iyer rightly brought out that there were people who were buying land from the poor farmers, selling it at a premium, and they were only doing the middleman's job. This is not the job of the industry. The industry is there to participate in the growth of the country. The Industry Friendly Act should be implemented. There should be some provision which has been brought out very, very aptly by the industry, that there should be provisions made for a single window clearance, And we are propagating that there should be some timelines laid down. There should be a regulator who can intervene and who can ensure that the land is made available to the industry body. Because it has got large number of drawbacks. In case the timelines are not adhered to, it adversely affects all the projects. It affects the builders. It affects the common man who has applied for affordable housing, as was brought out in the discussion today, and he has to wait for years. See the case in Noida and Greater Noida. What has happened?
Mr. Rohit, Mr. Sanyal has brought in too many things. He's talking of a single window system, then he wants a timeline to be tagged, and he also wants a regulator. He talked of the land mafia, but I think for that purpose only, even the opposition parties said, and the government has also agreed to bring an amendment so that the bill could be promulgated from retrospective effect.
In fact, the points raised by the Bharatiya Janata Party and the left parties have been incorporated. If the industry was doing its relationship with the owner of the land in a transparent way, this would not have happened. The situation would have been figured out in the single window between the person who's buying and the guy who's selling. The fact is that in the darkness of the night, many transactions have taken place which compromise the next generation of the owner. So it is not enough to satisfy one person in a family and get the papers signed and then whisk the entire family dependent on that land out of the way. So this is a scientific and a legislative way of running a modern country where you actually take into account that the Gram Sabha kicks in. Why does the industry feel the Gram Sabha will necessarily work anti-industry? The Gram Sabha is a way in which you can counsel some odd guy out and actually put social pressure on him to come in and understand things. And the very crucial point is that this one-stop solution business, where you give somebody some money and say, look, now you walk off from your land because I am doing development of the country, is no longer applicable in the India of the future. People are going to ask questions. And if the land value goes up by a multiplier of 40x, telling the person that I've given you double or 4 times, it will necessarily create bloodbaths, because the person will throw stones at that shining glass and steel which you put and take his land up by 40x. What industry needs to understand is that your social contract is going to be such, and people will demand such things, that you have to make the person a long-term equity partner in your project. So even if he has 5% of this growth story over 40 years, his next generation gets weaved in, and not necessarily by this one-time solution which is to get this guy out of the way. We are no longer in British India, where 1894 they said the state knows best, the private guy will pay out somebody, and you get out of the way for all times to come.
So you want an inclusive growth, probably, Shekhar. That part of inclusive growth will not be there if you could just go by the arguments of the industry.
We are living in times which are, awakened times. Now people are aware of their rights. People are aware of what the subsections of the industry has been doing, particularly the way they have created their own land banks, and there have been instances where there has been huge profit, because by specifying exactly how the rehabilitation has to be done, how the resettlement has to be done, how the compensatory process has to be worked out, I think more clarity is coming in, because what was absent was lack of clarity, and as Mr. Bansal was saying, lack of transparency. Now, what will happen is the new law will make it very difficult for your fly-by-night operators. People who are just in the business of, just acquiring land and then hoarding it and then future selling it off, for them it will become difficult. But for, I think, genuine industry people who are into big mega infrastructure development, I think, of course, initially they may be rather put off by this whole lengthy process of land acquisition, social impact assessment, and a string of rehabilitation measures to be done. But I think in the longer run, they will see merit in the new provisions, because for big mega project operators, I think they are going to see clarity, they are going to see long-term benefits and also long-term profits, because all these things, once there is clarity in the law, what all needs to be done? Because take, for instance, the entitlements that are being talked about. For instance, even relief and rehabilitation. It's very clear, when you are creating a relief or rehabilitation, you will have to ensure compensatory housing, compensatory creation of other infrastructures. So I think by bringing clarity, by bringing what exactly needs to be done, you are doing away with any particular section being alienated. So you get the cooperation of the people. The fact that, where we talk of consent of people, say if it is 70%, if it's a public project, or if it's a public partnership, then it is at least 80%. by ensuring people's cooperation, you are also ensuring there is peace, which is very, very important for any mega project. Because then you remove the uncertainty. Once you get the people's involvement, see, only by increasing the benefits to a large section of the people, you can get their cooperation. Of course, those people who had a killing in the last few years, for them it does make it difficult, I think, but for genuine infrastructure builders and for those who are in the business on a long-term basis, I think for them, this will be a relief once the things settle down, once the law is passed, when you have those mechanisms. So every time a land is going to be acquired for a very big project, because even for the land that is to be acquired, it is made very clear, it has to be for a public cause. That public cause is also been defined.
That's very important. This definition of public purpose, I think it has been rejigged. What are the highlights, Shekhar?
Well, I think among the key features where it talks of land may be acquired only for public purpose, and the bill defines public purpose to include defense and national security. It talks of roads, railways, highways, ports to be built by government and public sector enterprises, and then it goes on to talks of other ways in which the elements of urbanization, housing, which is also considered a public purpose. So I think the definition allows for a wide interpretation of what is public purpose.
Rohit?
Yeah, I think this allows transparently the industry and the private sector and the joint sector to be weaved into the legislative architecture governing land. This ensures that, not merely the poor farmer, as he was referred to, but the poor farm worker, who is not necessarily the owner of the land, but has equal rights in a particular situation in the country's development process. You can't just have Peoply Live kind of situation, if you remember the film, where the guy was asked to cash out and then became a petty construction worker at the tragic end of the film. So I think there is a social contract which industry needs to remind itself of, and surely it looks very complicated at the moment, but as Shekhar eminently put, if you specify the rights and the duties of each stakeholder, it's a better way to go about rather than these transactions which earlier happened where the company Bahadur or the British government or the Indian government, the color of the rulers changed, but the way in which they could act remained exactly the same.
Mr. Sanyal, I believe that industry has been doing a lot of CSR work, that corporate social responsibility thing and all. You are spending a lot of money. I think it runs into 5,000 crore or so. I couldn't understand one thing. If you are into CSR, why are you opposed to rehabilitation?
I'm not saying that the industry body is reacting to rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is part of, it has always happened, whether you see in the power structure, in the power transmission lines, when the land was acquired for giving power. Similarly, in road construction projects, in big projects, there has always been an angle of CSR. And it will continue with the new company bill also being introduced. The quantum is, minimum is 2% of the total project cost, and it is up to 5%. Any company will be investing in the CSR projects. However, this act by itself, if it gets implemented in toto, without a provision of a single window clearance, because today there are 60 approvals required for any project to be through. There are minimum 60 approvals and maximum time it takes for the land acquisition and for the environment clearance. It has been proved beyond doubt that if these two ministries and these two areas are not looked into in the new land acquisition bill or act, it is going to delay the projects further. It is going to also create cost escalations. It is going to delay the already existing 100 projects which are more than 1,000 crores infrastructure projects which are already on hold. It is further going to delay this process, and the entrepreneurs and the builders who have invested their funds, taken huge bank loans, they are going to suffer. After all, whenever there has been a transaction between industry and the farmers, there has been negotiation, there has been very transparent system of auction. There are many places where the transfer of land has taken place through auctions. There has been panchayat which is involved. They have been involved. But there are cases, exceptions are always there. There are cases where land grabbing has also taken place. We don't deny that. But this bill is, we are no doubt it's a very good bill. However, there is a need to make it industry friendly, which is not so in its present form.
I think this will also help in land acquisition legislation and give a real kind of compensation, if not the exact kind of compensation to the farmers. What do you think, Mr. Rohit?
The fact is that most land transactions are happening and being registered at 40% of their actual transacted value. The rest of it is going under the table, and the circle rates are woefully inadequate and blissfully unaware of the real price at which land is being transacted. So this 2x or 4x is actually a big sham. It is not going to work out in a practical sort of way. What is the market rate? The market rate is the thing which the Naib Tehsildar is willing to accept at the time the two parties, consenting parties, go for registration. And in a situation where the income tax and the land registry are completely in two different planets, and the income tax doesn't seem to care and know at what rate the actual transaction ought to have taken place, you will have people who are shortchanged considerably. So this is only one piece of the reform process, but alongside there has to be a very dynamic and electronically available data point on different land prices that are being offered and registered.
In the vicinity.
Totally, because otherwise it is actually the stock solution will be to go under the table and to negotiate something, and the Naib Tehsildar very innocently accepting that as the price, and that becoming the benchmark for the compensation, which is very scandalous and I think iniquitous, not merely to the present seller, but to his onward generations, who are the ones who we are also accountable to.
I think you are probably referring to Singur.
I'm referring to every single golf course that is coming next in the name of housing. And if the industry was that sincere, this EWS category housing, which was supposed to be precisely for
the economically weaker section,
for the persons who have sold out, for the neighboring people to have a decent housing. All of them, if PhD Chamber or Hindustan Times do a survey, you will realize that 99% people are the rich owners who have just given money under the table and own that EWS housing. So the spectacular failures of society to capture this reality has to be borne in mind now.
One of the amendments approved was to insert the provision of leasing of land to developers. Now, the registration is not mandatory here. Do you think that the registration should be made mandatory?
No, I think registration has to be mandatory, and the proposal for leasing was that in some states, why not, where actually if you don't have to transfer the land, if it can be given on lease, I think this is something, I think industry may welcome it because there is no problem.
It is definitely.
So the idea is then the landowner, still retains the ownership, and he could also get something by way of a regular payment on a long-term basis. See, the problem what has happened is most cases where the farmer has sold his land, then he has taken a compensation. Subsequently, the value of land has gone up, the value of that project has gone up, and the people who are actually operating the project are continuing to enjoy the benefits. Here the idea is the owner also continues to get some compensation. See, basically, as Mr. Bansal was referring to the Bollywood narrative, Pipli Life. See, we had Bollywood narratives like starting with, say, Do Bigha Zameen. Now, if the story has to be told only in terms of Bollywood narratives, from Do Bigha Zameen to Pipli Life, if the narrative has not changed, only the characters have undergone some change. So if the narrative has to change, and somewhere in between we have to also bring a narrative like Naya Daur, I think a law like this will go in the longer way. Of course, I do understand the concern of Mr. Sanyal where he talks of single window clearance. I think that will come subsequently, where once you have a legislation like this, you also need to look at where the clearances are granted, what is the mechanism of the clearances, and what is the transparency involved in those clearances.
Mr. Saurabh Sanyal, Mr. Shekhar Iyer, Mr. Rohit Bansal, thank you very much for expressing your views before the listeners of All India Radio.
You were listening to a discussion on Land Acquisition Bill. The participants were Saurabh Sanyal, Executive Director, PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Rohit Bansal, CEO, India Strategic Group, and Shekhar Iyer, Associate Editor, Hindustan Times, and Manikant Thakur, AIR Correspondent, who initiated and moderated the discussion. It came to you in the program Current Affairs, produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.